You know, the success or failure of our vegetables or our flowers very much depends upon the journey we take them on. So our flowers or our vegetables will start off as a packet of seeds, then we'll grow them on into healthy seedlings, then we need to move them on again into individual trays, and then eventually we want them to become mature and healthy plants that are going to either provide us with loads of beautiful vegetables or a wonderful display of flowers. But there's one particular aspect of that journey that can make an enormous difference to the success or failure of your flowers or your vegetables. And that is the way or manner that we deal with our seedlings once they get to this size here. And that's what I'm going to cover in this video today, why potting on is such an important part of that journey to get from this to healthy and productive vegetables or a wonderful and beautiful flower display. So hopefully by the end of the video you'll understand why potting on is so important, and it will give you 1 or 2 tips for how you might do things differently in the future. Now, potting on is the process by where we would transplant seedlings from smaller containers into larger ones. And over the years I've made so many mistakes in potting on that's resulted in failure of some of my seedlings that I've learned to be very cautious and measured in the way I do this. And there is a correct way of doing this which I'll show you today. So these are some of my winter veg. These are Swiss chard and these were sown 3 weeks ago. So they're now at a place where they're really healthy, but if I show you and tap the bottom and take them out the tray, you can see that the whole of the compost is completely covered in roots. Now, a container of this size is quite a confined space for this amount of plants, and therefore when the seedlings get to this size here and they get to that level of root capacity, it's clearly necessary to put them into larger containers. Otherwise there won't be enough nutrients and moisture in this limited amount of compost in order for these plants to grow on. So I have to think about separating them out and potting them on into larger containers. Now, depending upon what you're growing and how fast that plant grows will determine the size of the container or the cell tray that you'll put your seedlings into. Now, the need to pot on is not just about the amount of roots, although it is related to that, because clearly in a small seed tray such as this, there's only a limited amount of nutrients in the compost, and the larger the seedlings get and the more the roots grow, the more their need for nutrients increases, and therefore there's only a certain capacity of nutrients in this compost. If I don't pot these seedlings on in good time, all that's going to happen is that these will start to go yellow and eventually die off because they're not going to be able to get the nutrients that they need. Another reason is moisture retention. When I water these, all of those roots that you've just seen are going to be competing for that moisture, and the larger the plants get and the more roots that grow, the quicker that moisture is going to be taken up. Therefore, if I was to leave them in this seed tray here, even just for 1 more week, it's likely that these would dry out really quickly because the moisture will just be taken by the roots as soon as the moisture or the water goes in there. Ultimately, what we're trying to do now is take these seedlings to the next stage where they can grow and thrive into plants for us to either pot on again, depending upon what you're growing, or be able to transplant outside. What we're really looking for is to try and encourage a really strong root system, which ultimately result in better growth to the stems and to the leaves. Now, timing is crucial in deciding when is the right time to pot your seedlings on, because you can pot them on too early when they're not ready. So the ideal time for potting on is when the plant has developed its first true leaves and is about 2 to 4 inches in height, which is about 5 to 10 centimetres. However, that can vary, because if I take for an example a vegetable like celery, which grows really slowly, I tend to transplant those when they're really small. They're not anywhere near this size. But if you transplant certain vegetables when they're too small, the chances of being successful is reduced. Ideally, when they've got the first true leaves is the right time. Now, you might decide to use cell trays, which is my favourite method of potting on. Or if you haven't got cell trays, you might use individual pots. However, the choice of what you pot onto is another crucial decision that you'll make. So you may argue that these seedlings here might be large enough to put into a larger pot. So if I separate these out and take one of the seedlings and show you the size of the seedling, just gently tease them out. If the seedlings are a little bit more difficult to separate at the beginning, all you need to do is just shake the compost just gently, but not holding the plants, and they should then separate quite nicely. If you hold that by the leaf, you can see there I've got a good plant. Now, I could put it directly into this pot here and that would grow, but the problem with potting on into a pot that's too large is that if I fill this up with compost here and then put my seedling in, What you can see there is a seedling that's got an awful lot of compost around it. So when I water this and this gets saturated, there's going to be pretty much everything that seedling needs in order for it to grow. But the problem with that is it's unlikely to encourage it to develop its roots because it has all the moisture it needs. Instead, what I prefer to do is put the seedlings in a cell tray like this, which has got far less capacity for the compost in the individual cell tray. Now what that's going to mean, because the seedling in this cell tray is going to be in a lot less compost than this, the capacity of the moisture in the cell tray is significantly reduced, and that means that the seedling will take that moisture up fairly quickly, and it's going to want to search for more, which is going to encourage it to put more roots out. So this very quickly will start to fill up with roots, and that's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for a really strong root ball. If I left this seedling in here, it would grow, but it wouldn't develop the roots as quickly as it will in a cell tray over here. After a few weeks of putting my seedlings in a cell tray like this, just like I have here a few days ago with my spinach, in a couple of weeks' time, these cell trays will be completely full of roots, and I'm going to have a really strong root system, and it's likely the plants be around about this high here, and they'll either be ready for me to transplant onto their final pots or put them directly into their final growing positions. So as you can see here, you might think you're doing your plants a favour by putting them in big pots, but actually you're discouraging their growth because you're not giving them anything to do. You're not getting the seedling to work for producing roots because you're giving it everything it needs in a large pot. And that's why these cell trays here are absolutely perfect for root development on the next stage of the potting on process. Now it may be after 2 weeks, I may then decide if I'm going to put them in pots, to put them in pots of around about this size, or maybe something bigger than the cell but smaller than this. Make a decision based upon the vegetable or the flower that I'm growing. And as you can see, there's quite a range of different sizes of cell trays available depending upon which you want to pot into. My favoured ones, as you've seen, are these 24 cells here for most of my vegetables and flowers. You can get these 35 cell trays here, which are smaller but slightly deeper. If you're growing flowers or vegetables that have a particularly deep root system, then these are something called root trainers. As you can see, they're very deep. And in here, I can get 60. These are really good as well because inside there's ridges on every side of each individual cell, and that encourages the roots to grow down those ridges, and that helps to develop their strength. Or even I use these second-hand polystyrene containers, which years ago I bought some flowers in, and you never throw anything away, they're always good to reuse, and they're a really good size as well. You can see that they're wider in terms of the better capacity of compost you can get in. So instead of planting these seedlings directly outside, I decided I want to pop them on again into cell trays. This will be the next size up that I would actually use. You can see I've got a 6 cell and an 8 cell tray here. Now remember, the decision to pot on and what size to pot onto is a really important one, and that will be determined by the size of your seedlings and what type of flower or vegetable you're actually growing. If you are potting on, there is a correct way of handling the seedlings, and I'll show you that now. So I'm just move the camera a little bit closer to show you the potting tray here and show you the technique that I would use to pot on these seedlings here into a cell tray such as this. So I'm just going to move the camera and bring it over. So the first thing we're going to do is fill a cell tray up with compost. This is a peat-free compost, and this is good for potting on. I do tend to find that when you are potting on and transplanting, the peat-free compost is fine. I know there's a lot of conversation out there at the moment about how good peat-free is, but I have found it good for transplanting. So notice what I've done, I've filled it up and just gently tapped the bottom of the tray and then just fill over the top. Then we'll get our seedlings. I've already loosened these to show you the roots, so I'll just pick up a clump of them. They separate quite easily. My advice always is when you are going to transplant, just don't water the day before, because you want the compost fairly dry, because it helps to separate out the seedlings easier. If it's wet, it tends to stick them together. Try and handle the seedlings by the leaves. Just get a few out, just to separate them out. Just be very gentle with this. You don't want to force. If you feel you have to do any force, then stop. Just gently tease them out. These are a good size. There we go. So I've still got plenty of seedlings there, and I've still got these ones over here to do a little bit later. So let's just gently pick them up by the leaves and just put them to one side so that I can show you what I mean. Now resist the tendency to try and push the compost down with your fingers. What you want to do is encourage root growth. If you can pat the compost down too much, it restricts the ability of the roots to grow into what would be consolidated compost. So that's why I've just literally tapped the bottom and not consolidated it at all. And all I'm going to do then is just use a pen You can use a cane or whatever you do, a small dibber, just to put some holes right in the middle. Then we'll pick up one of my seedlings, it's a nice size one there, and then we're just going to pop it into the hole, and then have a bit of spare compost just to push it and compact it around the sides. Now, I'm not trying to push the compost down too much, I'm just trying to give it a bit of support. And you'll find that when you first transplant, the seedlings might flop a little bit. Don't worry about that, because the seedlings will soon recover after a few days once they've been watered. Then we get another seedling, push that into the hole, and then put my fingers on the side. At no point while I'm doing this am I touching the stem of the plant. And I'll do one more, another hole. Put the seedling in the hole. The pen can help to get the roots into the hole, and then just compact it down. I'm going to do that now for the rest of the trays and give it a good water. So you can see there, always handle by the leaves and don't over compact your compost. And I'll fill this tray up now with the seedlings, give it a water, and that'll be these potted on. So just putting the last couple of seedlings in place. In the tray. There we go. And all I'll do then is gently just vibrate the tray in my hands, shake it just to get any loose and excessive compost off the surface. And then we'll just give it a good water. Notice when I'm watering as low as I possibly can to the tray. I'm also using what you've seen on many videos before, which is a converted milk container with holes drilled into the top. I'm just going to let that seep in, and I'm just going to give it one more water just to make sure that the compost is completely soaked. And now you can see that seed tray is completely potted on. As I mentioned, don't worry about them flopping over when you first pop them on, because once the root starts to absorb the moisture, and over a few days, they'll soon perk up. And all I'm going to do now is put them in my mini greenhouse to grow on. So I hope I've demonstrated the correct way to pot your seedlings on, whether they're flowers or whether they're vegetables. I've got a bit more potting on to do now for some of my flowers, calendulas, nigellas and pansies, and a few more winter vegetables I want to pot on in exactly the same way. And then once they get large enough, I'll either repot them into their final larger pots or put them directly into their final planting positions. But it is crucial in terms of selecting the right size of cell tray or pot to plant your vegetables or flowers into, in order to encourage them to get that really strong root development and give you good, strong, healthy plants, which are much more likely to be successful if you follow this process. And I hope you found that video useful, and if you did, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. And if you'd like to subscribe to the channel for future videos on how to sow and grow fruit, vegetables and flowers, and 1 or 2 recipe ideas, don't forget to press the subscribe button. And I'll see you all on the next video.